Hello and welcome. We're grateful that you could join us on Zoom and YouTube Live today for an in-depth conversation with MAPS leaders discussing how we're approaching this pivotal time following the FDA Advisory Committee hearing as we look toward August. My name is Bridget McKay. I'm one of MAPS Donor Experience Officers, and I'm honored to be your moderator. I've been with MAPS for over 2 years serving our donor community, and I'm passionate about alleviating mental health crises. We received hundreds of questions. Thank you. These presentations today are prepared with your questions in mind, and we'll get to more specific questions and themes at the end. Let's jump in. I'm thrilled to introduce you to our incredible speakers today. Kris Lotlikar serves as the Executive Director of MAPS, overseeing the financing and strategic direction of MAPS organizations globally. Kris was a leader in creating modern renewable markets and in defining the early cannabis industry as founder of ArcView Market Research. Kris maintains a lifelong commitment to changing drug and criminal justice laws, starting as a founder of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Kris believes confronting stigmas around mental health and drug users is key to unlocking the human potential for healing and happiness. Next is Betty Aldworth, Director of Communications and Post-Prohibition Strategy. With the communications team, Betty works to share MAP's story with our audiences and generate support for psychedelic research and reform through the media. Betty also works with colleagues and allies across the drug policy reform movement to illustrate the promise of a post-prohibition world through inspiring public education opportunities. We are also joined by Allison Coker, Director of Research. Allison brings a tremendous amount of experience to MAPS, where she is laying the groundwork and planting seeds for the future of our research and international education programs. Prior to joining MAPS, she worked for several years as a regulatory scientist for Lykos Therapeutics, and she continues to collaborate with cutting-edge psychedelic researchers at UCSF. She brings a commitment to scientific rigor and sensible healthcare reform that is essential to MAPS' mission. And last, but certainly not least, Ismail Ali, the Director of Policy and Advocacy. In his role, Ismail supports the design, building, and implementation of psychedelic policy reform across the country and world. He has been personally utilizing psychedelics and other substances in celebratory and spiritual contexts for over half his life, and has been actively participating in the drug policy reform movement for a decade. Ismail co-founded and co-chairs the board of the Psychedelic Bar Association and is licensed to practice law in the state of California. Kris, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us today and being champions and supporters of MAPS. We're so grateful for your support, and especially you carving out some time in your busy lives to talk to us. We'll talk about MAPS in a few minutes, but first off, I'm eager here to talk about you're all eager to hear about, which is MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. We'll talk about the historic FDA Advisory Committee panel in a moment, but I wanted to lay some groundwork for you about the research that MAPS has incubated for so many years. Over the past few years, MAPS has been working to fully spin out Lykos Therapeutics, formerly MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, as a separate organization with its own board of directors and management team. A key part of this has been them changing their name, helping to illustrate the separation between our work as a nonprofit organization and their role as a pharmaceutical public benefit corporation. In the past year, Lykos has achieved some key milestones in this journey. They completed the phase 3 trials. They published the study results from MAP3, with 71% of patients no longer qualifying with a PTSD diagnosis, and they submitted the new drug application currently under review by the FDA. On June 4th, 2024, the FDA convened a meeting of the Drug Advisory Committee to gain their perspective on the Lykos Therapeutic new drug application for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. First and foremost, we applaud both the FDA and for Lykos for their diligent efforts in preparing and presenting at the meeting. And as I'm sure you've all seen the headlines, the panel made a non-binding recommendation against the safety and efficacy of this treatment. The FDA has set a target date for their decision in August of this year, but that date is also non-binding. The reality is this reaction, our initial reaction to this internally was a gut punch. Many of us have been working on this for a long time, and it was a major setback and disheartening. But MAPS has suffered setbacks before and remains committed to supporting this work. First, the final decision has not been made. FDA's review of the new drug application for the first psychedelic-assisted therapy is ongoing, and their decision will encompass a holistic review of the application and its safety data. Several of the Several of the novel elements merit careful consideration. Patient safety needs to be prioritized. Critical feedback should be respected, and we appreciate the process that is being undertaken. MAPS supports Lykos in their continued work with the FDA to bring this first-in-class treatment to the patients who so desperately need it. MAPS is confident that Lykos will be able to navigate this situation and how to work with the FDA on the new drug application. Lykos has completed 2 phase 3 trials with substantial significance and clinically meaningful results. And the submission of the NDA for the first psychedelic-assisted therapy is a huge accomplishment worth separation. Before I turn it over to Betty, I would like...
Celebration, Kris.
Celebration. Before I turn it over to Betty, who has led our communications for MAPS for 4 years, I want to acknowledge how difficult it's been to navigate the last year, where we have operated in parallel with Lykos, who is a highly regulated pharma company. We are engaging in new and groundbreaking work in psychedelics and mental health. All of us at MAPS have done our best to keep our mission and the individuals who will benefit our work at the top of our minds in our decision-making. I want to assure you that none of us at the nonprofit, not me, not Rick Dovlin, not anyone, has a financial interest in Lykos. We do this because our role is to represent our supporters and our donors who have made this work possible with your generosity and to ensure the incentives are aligned with public benefit. But I want to assure our supporters, while we have handed the baton to Lykos to get this program across the line and to bring MDMA-assisted therapy to the public, whatever the results in August, we at MAPS remain committed to seeing this through. Over to you, Betty.
Thanks so much, Kris. Good afternoon, evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Glad to see so many folks here. First, I want to acknowledge that it did take quite some time for us to make a public statement or to reach out to you with an email or an update. I know that that's been confusing, especially since you've counted on us for incredibly frequent updates for so many years now. And as difficult as it's been to remain relatively quiet about the MDMA program and the FDA process, it's also necessary. I want to share a little bit about why before we go on. So though MAPS PBC, now Lykos, was responsible for organizing the program since its inception, MAPS was still the sponsor and was sending out news about the trials and the FDA process. With the separation between MAPS, the nonprofit, and Lykos, the public benefit corporation, Lykos now fully owns the drug development and regulatory program. The Lykos communications team is responsible for deciding what to announce and when. It's a complex thing, this relationship between MAPS and Lykos, and many, many people remain confused about the differences between the two organizations. Drug development, clinical trials, and the FDA process are also their own very complex things. And so it's important that people are getting rock-solid information directly from the experts who are most closely involved. When it comes to Lykos's work, that's Lykos. For those reasons, to reduce the confusion and to make sure that the right information is coming from the right people, we haven't been communicating very much about Lykos, the FDA or MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. I want to personally acknowledge that that's probably been confusing and distressing to some of you, and I apologize for that. We have, it's been hard for us in different ways, and to change some of those ways that we're talking to you, and I know that for many of you that's also been, confusing. So, of course, many of you submitted questions today about the FDA, MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, how to become a therapist, the drug development program, on and on and on and on. We simply won't be able to answer those. I'm hoping that you'll be able to find the answers you're looking for through some other resources. However, there are many, many people offering excellent analysis of the events, and I am going to send out, or we're going to send a follow-up email with a list of some of those that we recommend that you follow. I'll just briefly mention Lucid News, Josh Hardman at Psychedelic Alpha, Rachel Newer, who's a freelance journalist and an author of a book on MDMA, Matt Baggett of Tactogen, David Rabin's Psychedelic Report podcast, and then organizations who are standing up for rigorous science, like the MDMA Alliance and Chacruna Institute. The news cycle of the past several months has highlighted just how important our work is, actually. We're still fighting a lot of deeply rooted stigmas about psychedelics and the people who use them for medical, spiritual, wellness, or celebratory purposes. We also hear the misinformation, and we see how easily false or inflated narratives have taken over the public conversation. You know, we were founded almost 40 years ago because stigma interfered with science at that time. And evidence-based psychedelic education, research, and policy reform are as critically needed today as they always have been. We have tremendous experience and demonstrated success in meeting that need. Over the past months, I've seen many people on our team and in our support network activated with a renewed and tangible understanding of just how important our work is to creating that future we hope to see. We see the potential for healing in the stories of people whose lives have been changed by psychedelic-assisted therapies, whether through clinical trials or outside of those systems. We read the stories of reductions in unjust incarceration, or of loved ones who survived opioid overdose with naloxone in places where compassionate drug policies are enacted. And we hear from so many of you, who have become more educated about psychedelics through the resources we provide. And then you've used that education to support your communities as we navigate our way through the end of drug prohibition. So even during these challenging months, we remain incredibly excited to have the opportunity to work on sharing our education, policy reform, and research with you and with the world. Thanks so much for being on this journey with us.
All right, a few of you have asked what's next for MAPS, but before we get to that, I want to be very clear that MAPS has agreed to take a more limited and strategic approach to the public discourse about MDMA-assisted therapy because we hope that it's in the best interest of moving forward the issue. This cause and the movement is bigger than us, and we want to keep the focus on the science. The big reason we're doing this webinar, or one of the big reasons, is to explain this decision to our supporters. It was not an easy call. No matter what happens in August, there's still monumental work to do. And with your support and advocacy, we can work together towards achieving this vision of a post-prohibition world where people have legal and equitable access to psychedelics for healing and personal growth. It is in these movements that remind me of a truth about doing world-changing work. It's that it's always perceived as being either inevitable or impossible, and neither is ever true. Changing the world takes big ideas, but it also takes hard work and persistence, which is how MAPS has built for so long towards our goals. And our work is not done. MAPS has always believed in a multidisciplinary approach, and not just to make our name hard to spell. Our three focus areas moving forward are going to be advancing research, changing policy, and shaping culture. All three of these areas will be heavily featured at the Psychedelic Science Conference in 2025, when we'll all be returning to Denver for the world's largest gathering on psychedelics. We expect over 10,000 people to attend. Now you're going to hear from the folks who are closest to each of these areas of work, beginning with Allison Coker to talk about research.
Thank you, Kris. I'll talk a little bit now about MAPS's research. MAPS is dedicated to serving the public and advancing the responsible integration of psychedelics in a post-prohibition context. In alignment with our values and in pursuit of this vision, MAPS spent nearly 4 decades initiating first-in-class psychedelic clinical trials to pave the way for the medicalization of psychedelic-assisted therapies. Clinical trials are critical to define the boundaries of the safety and efficacy of psychedelics for treating serious health conditions in a clinical context. Rigorous research on the risks and benefits of psychedelics in a medicalized context allows policies to be grounded in data and science rather than stigma, and they can help make psychedelics more accessible. For these reasons and more, the medicalization of psychedelics is an important piece of the puzzle. And the ecosystem is different than it was 40 years ago. When MAPS started pursuing a drug development pathway, there were essentially no psychedelic research organizations and certainly no psychedelic drug development companies. Since then, MAPS has incubated a pathway for medicalization, a pathway that will be taken by many drug developers pursuing research pipelines, exploring the potential applications of psychedelics. However, medicalization is unlikely to answer all of the questions that we have about the best practices, access, and cultural adaptations for the use of these substances. As our collective knowledge expands, MAPS continues to serve as stewards of the psychedelic research landscape that we helped cultivate. MAPS's strength as a nonprofit is in our dedication to pursue research directions that prioritize public benefit. MAPS remains committed to fostering new research directions and setting new research precedents that expand our knowledge about the uses of these substances. MAPS also remains committed to supporting international researchers and practitioners as we utilize research as an important mechanism to expand the accessibility and cultural attunement of psychedelic-assisted therapy for communities that experience marginalization. MAPS intends to achieve these goals through our Research Accelerator program by incubating, informing, and inspiring research that advance our values in the ecosystem. We prioritize advancing research that does at least one of these three things. One, research that enables new investigative directions that serve the public interest. Two, research that improves patient access and patient experience in the US and globally. And three, research that contributes to public knowledge and informs sensible drug policy and education. MAPS amplifies these values within the ecosystem to accelerate psychedelic research through several pathways. MAPS continues to initiate projects that open doors for future psychedelic research. For example, MAPS is challenging an FDA decision to prevent real-world research on smoked and vaporized cannabis, and we'll share our process and learnings with the community. MAPS also incubates research by collaborating with subject matter experts to develop unique projects that may not occur as part of a normal drug development pathway. For example, MAPS is pursuing qualitative research with partners to evaluate the best practices for psychedelic-assisted therapies in new populations. MAPS financially supports mission-aligned research through our grant-making and fiscal sponsorship programs. We want to fund researchers worldwide to advance our collective understanding of the potential applications and risks associated with psychedelics, and to enable new clinical applications of well-studied treatments. For example, MAPS grantees are currently evaluating psychedelic-assisted masked prolonged exposure therapy, and international grantees are assessing the feasibility of psychedelic-assisted therapy in refugee populations. We hope to increase our funding capacity in the coming year in order to continue to support more mission-aligned research. And finally, MAPS educates the community by hosting international therapist education programs to equip therapy providers with foundational knowledge and practical therapeutic skills in psychedelic-assisted therapies to increase awareness and activate potential research initiatives across the globe. In this program, we work with local advocates to create a dual learning opportunities and wisdom sharing between the diverse therapists and MAPS to learn about the historical context and cultural adaptability of psychedelic-assisted therapy around the world, as well as build a community of global therapists who can support each other and connect on providing culturally informed care in their regions. By diversifying our research focus as we look forward, we hope to initiate and support many research projects that serve the community and contribute to our collective understanding of psychedelics. Next, we'll hear from Ismail Ali to talk about policy.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Bridget, Kris, Betty, Allison, for all the context, the info, putting this together. I want to appreciate the audience, all, 550 of y'all that are here. As Kris said at the beginning, there are a lot of things going on in the world. There's every reason to focus on any one of those other issues. And I'm really grateful that we get a chance to have this conversation because we know it's been coming up a lot. It's something that we've been thinking about a lot. And I'm just grateful that the conversation is ongoing, even though I understand that the threats, the concerns, everything can feel really existential at times. We've been holding a lot It can be challenging to understand what is right to be transparent about, what to have discernment about. But the truth is that a lot of us have been working in the background on a lot of things that don't always get the benefit of media visibility or the drama of public scrutiny, for that matter. So I'm excited to share a bit more of that today. We got a bunch of questions with the RSVPs about MAPS policy angle and future plans. So I'll touch on some of the big picture things now. And I think in the Q&A, we'll get into a few more details. But hopefully this initial kind of spiel gives a little bit of big picture context for the direction we've been doing so far, where we're going from here, all of that. So let's start with the basics. I don't know how many in the audience have gotten to take a close look at MAPS's 7 principles, but my colleague Natalie Ginsberg and I drafted those with input from the rest of the organization and key allies some years ago. And I, of course, have a biased perspective, but feel like they've been helpful to ground us in the last few years. And today I'm going to focus on the one that's most applicable to the policy department, which is this line that maybe y'all have heard or seen on the website or kind of we're touched on here, which is that MAPS envisions a post-prohibition future based on consciousness, not criminalization. And as just maybe a fun kind of carrot, I'll share that we went back and forth a lot about whether or not the word there should be consciousness or compassion. And I think both work really well. But I'll explain what that means, because consciousness is kind of a fuzzy word, and I don't think it actually means the same thing to everyone. But for me, it's pretty simple. We should be conscious, that is, aware about and responsible for the impacts of drug policy approaches that we propose. Here at MAPS, we believe that the responsible drug policy framework that most accurately reflects reality requires that consciousness, reflection, honesty, self-awareness, not only for individuals, all are valuable for a personal therapeutic process, but also for society as a whole. The second part is a little bit more straightforward and essential grounding. We reject the criminalization of people who grow, make, distribute, or use drugs, which increases the criminalization that increases the risk of drug use and danger of the drugs themselves, of the drug economies, and it doesn't actually keep people who use drugs or our families or communities any safer. Even if we thought that mistakenly 50 years ago, 40 years ago, even 30 years ago, we're now at a point where we can't pretend like that's the case anymore. We have to look with eyes more open than we have before. So with those 2 points, our goal is sort of to design a harmonious drug policy ecosystem that balances public health, individual liberty and choice, and equitable access across a variety of regulatory approaches. I know. Consciousness, harmony, what the heck is this? Is this an eye-gazing workshop or a think tank? Who are you people? I'll get to that, but first I want to reground us on what's going on here and why I'm using these words that might seem fluffy, but actually have an essential part to play in where we go from here. A lot of you know this already. The cultivation, use, and trade of psychoactive substances, including psychedelics, has been a consistent aspect of human history. Prohibition, criminalization, and militarization, and the oppression inherent in those systems has led to drastic consequences. And might I add that those first 2 points, prohibition and criminalization, are actually blips in the larger arc of human history as it relates to drugs. We've traded and used drugs for most of our species' history. So we're really trying to reverse and change something that's relatively new in the longer arc. So that modern, ongoing global war on drugs has been justified by bad science, racism, fear. It's led to mass incarceration, the erosion of civil liberties, ecological damage, economic waste. And what I've heard described, which I appreciate, even though it's kind of an aggressive way to think of it, but this public health polycrisis of adulteration, poisoning, overdose, substance use disorders, and the various downstream effects of that, which, by the way, affect everybody, regardless of your demographic, regardless of your race, regardless of where you are on the socioeconomic spectrum, doesn't really care about your politics. It's happening to everybody. And most of those harmful effects have, in fact, disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable. And there's an imperative to tend to and repair those harms. Again, most of you probably know this. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe that's the first thing that interests you, and psychedelics are just kind of the sparkly icing on the cake, and you're like, whoa, this is a bigger picture here. And we're tracking that. So our work at the policy department at MAPS is to advocate for drug policies that respond to that history and present, in particular by supporting the dignity and rights of people who use psychedelics and other drugs, free from fear and stigma. Because so much of this is not just the policy that we're navigating, but also these social dynamics that impact whether or not we can talk about this stuff to our families, whether or not we can talk about it at work, how we talk about it to our communities. So we work toward fostering a diverse psychedelic ecosystem. Psychedelic policy is interconnected with many other elements of our society, economic, ecological, cultural aspects. To achieve equilibrium between these interlocking pieces, we try to intentionally pursue a variety of policy pathways in service to, again, bringing that word back, a more compassionate post-prohibition world. Our approach utilizes stakeholder engagement, research, data analysis. We work with the departments that are being described here today. We work with people internally and externally in service of advancing an evidence-based and equitable framework to create a world rooted in justice and health. And obviously, we have not done this alone. Long-standing systemic and societal transformation that's taken, depending on who you ask, 50 years, 150 years, 500 years to build, requires a collective effort. So we've strategically partnered with individuals and organizations across the field and really worldwide to build and maintain the movement. I'm really grateful to call friends and allies, so many folks across the field who've been working sometimes for years and years and years to make something happen, even in the face of the many challenges that have come in. We're also committed to freedom of choice, sometimes described as individual liberty by some folks, because the reality is that people use psychedelics in different ways. Legal access to psychedelics for a wide range of individuals and communities across personal, collective healing, and spiritual contexts requires what we've been calling a multiple model ecosystem. That means medicalization, decriminalization, and different forms of regulated access, as well as state-administered mechanisms to fund projects and gather more information like research grants and task forces. We need them all. We need to work to increase coherence between these mechanisms to increase points of access and implement appropriate oversight and accountability. It's a really important point. We've talked a lot for good reason about accountability, responsibility, ethics, and the clinical trials and beyond. In a decriminalized environment, we don't remove accountability. In a legal state program, in a church environment, we don't remove accountability. What we're doing is looking at what are the types of frameworks that we use to apply to these different structures, and how are those appropriate for the type of regulation that's needed in that context. So I'm all about like multiple paths that work together. So since MAPS Policy Department was founded in 2015, we're really proud to have provided advisory input, technical advising, public comment, testimony for bills, committees, proposals, and task forces in Washington, D.C., in states across the United States, and globally, at the United Nations and in countries around the world. Our efforts have advanced successful reforms or first-of-their-kind proposals, and we're grateful to be part of increasing chorus of voices advancing policy change. Anytime I see anyone that really thinks that they know all the answers, I get suspicious. So what I'm trying to say here is like, I don't know if I know them all, if we know them all, but we know them all together. And that's really what we're going for here. How do we be in better coalition and better conversation so that we can actually iterate and improve as we go? So last but not least, we strive with all of this to look at policies and to prioritize policies that are reparative and generative, that incorporate measures that repair the harms of the war on drugs and lay the groundwork for criminal justice and drug policy reform, even beyond psychedelics. Our work is inherently political, but it's also beyond that. We also seek to understand the spiritual, social, and global aspects of this resurgence of interest in psychedelics to help us craft policy that repairs instead of reproduces the failed logic of drug prohibition. I'm going to close with just a couple examples of those projects because I do feel like it gives a little bit of context for exactly what we mean by reparative justice. People are like, where are these words? So one big one that I'm really, really proud of is reforming drug sentencing guidelines. We've been working with the coalition to alleviate some of the socioeconomic harms of the war on drugs. And we just wrapped up a multi-org campaign to help influence the U.S. Sentencing Commission to review the drug conversion tables. If you don't know what those are, keep your eyes open to our socials for more info. We're going to be publishing our public comment as well as some more information about that soon. I feel like that's really critical because it's one of those things that gets left behind when all of the hype focuses on a particular area of the research or something else. We've also been working on a project to ensure that people impacted by the criminal legal system aren't excluded as psychedelics interact with the mainstream. So we've initiated a project, including a literature review and hopefully other resources, to explore the legal, ethical, and practical considerations related to offering psychedelic-assisted care to system-impacted people, broadly defined as people who've been impacted by the U.S. criminal legal system. And of course, I need to highlight and remind folks that for the last 5+ years, we've been working toward increasing health equity within the psychedelic ecosystem, in part by producing and curating panels, talks, workshops, and events that really integrate and acknowledge existing racial and other imbalances and access to psychedelic care, education, or training. And if you haven't already, check out Virtual Trip. We have amazing, amazing content from the Psychedelic Science Conference last year, both in the policy stage, as well as the culture stage, as well as others, that really gets into like, well, what does it mean to be trying to create legal access within the system? So overall, I hope that this, and we hope this approach will help cultivate what, again, I like to call a harmonious ecosystem, one in which we do our best to lay groundwork for future broad all-drug policy reform, even while strategically advancing reforms for single drugs or limited categories of drugs. We strive to protect the rights of and reduce the negative impacts on people, plants, or practices that have histories of use in indigenous or underground settings. That topic alone could be its own webinar, because there's so much to say about how to work with Native American tribes, registered, and people who are not registered under federal systems, indigeneity across the world, Central and South America, underground and traditional and hybrid and mestizo contexts. There's a lot of different ways that people use psychedelics, and there is simply no one-size-fits-all approach. So we think a lot about what are the ways to avoid those secondary impacts down the line. We seek clarity about the origins, preparations, and ecological sources of psychedelic substances, including plants, animals, people like to forget about the animals, and synthetics, which I understand the suspicion around, but also maybe have a part to play in shifting the ecological reality of the system as it exists. And we commit, as I mentioned, to including reparative measures whenever we can, like protections for those historical and ongoing traditional and community use and relationships. We've been quietly working on this and so much more for years. And regardless of whatever happens next month, I and we intend to keep staying laser focused on the big picture, setting the groundwork and the guardrails for a conscious transition to a safer, more responsible, and more compassionate post-prohibition world. Again, appreciate everyone's time and questions. I'm going to pass it back to Betty to talk a little bit about culture, and then I think we'll have some time for a deeper Q&A at the end. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Iz. Why do I sign myself up for going after Izzy? It's a terrible choice. Izzy, you said there that this could be its own whole webinar. I think that there are many things here that could be. And one of the things that I'm very excited about as we're moving into this fall is really much more actively communicating about the MAPS initiatives. We've been working so hard on some of this behind the scenes work that Izzy's been talking about, both for our legacy programs and for new programs that we're going to be able to start talking to you about more soon. So, you'll be seeing some updates on our website and some new content on socials and that sort of thing that where you can follow along on all of this. So, education and culture. If you'll indulge me, I would like to share why I believe, have lived that education and public perception change are as elemental and instrumental to our work as the research and policy reform. In 2009, I started my work in the drug policy reform movement with educating patients, doctors, and caregivers and lawmakers in Colorado about cannabis science. In 2009, believe it or not, almost no one had heard of CBD. I had to explain what CBD was. Now, raise your hand if you can hit a CBD store if you threw a rock out your window right now, right? I'm not suggesting that that's a great model, but what I am saying is that a lot can change in 15 years. For 15 years, I've seen that evidence-based public education, honest storytelling, and people's lived experiences always overcome the status quo, eventually, or should. I've seen it happen many, many times, despite many, many setbacks. And so I have no doubt that our collective perseverance and the facts will bring us through to this post-prohibition society that Izzy described so beautifully. Our collective knowledge about psychedelics is growing so quickly every day. Yes, of course, we are learning about their safety and their efficacy for the treatment of serious conditions in Western medicine and within these structures that are mandated by various regulatory bodies, and that is incredibly important. But as you've heard from Izzy and Allison, There's so much more to learn together and share with each other across so many disciplines and within our various circles of varying sizes. The potential of psychedelics for healing and personal growth is vast, but the risks are also very real. For psychedelics to be most safely integrated into our societies, we need to be honest about the potential benefits and the risks of personal use, of course, but also of the systems that we're creating, the potential benefits and the risks of the systems that we're creating, how we choose to set our priorities, the values that we bring to the work, the principles, and of course, of the impacts of the systems we are building that we might not be able to see clearly today. We really recognize the importance of developing a comprehensive understanding of psychedelics, the entirety of psychedelia, teaching people how to navigate altered states of consciousness, yes, but also how policies and practices and choices impact individuals and communities. In order for our movement to be successful and for as many people as possible to benefit from psychedelics, information is key, not just for the people who use drugs, but for medical professionals, legislators, health systems, pharmacies, families, and communities. So I'm here today to talk about our educational and some of our cultural programs. We have a couple of professional psychedelic education programs that I'm very excited about. Some of you may have heard about our first responder training in Denver. That's the shorthand name for it, but the idea is that by providing first responders in places both with reformed psychedelic policies and those without, with specific comprehensive training on psychedelic crisis assessment and intervention, we can equip first responders to be more competent when responding to a psychedelic-related emergency or crisis. And we can provide for people who are experiencing those emergencies or crises a very different kind of experience. The experience of interacting with law enforcement or EMTs when experiencing that sort of event can be very damaging or jarring or disruptive. But if you are able to give everyone a little more information and a little more training in order to respond in a way that is more conducive to quickly moving out of any sort of crisis state, you can have much, much better outcomes for the person who is experiencing the crisis and even for the responders. The dangers of that are reduced across the board. So I'm very excited about this, in part because we've actually already heard from someone who experienced such a crisis, was able to interact with people, with EMTs who had had the training and who has come out of that feeling like that training that was received by the EMTs was pivotal in moving her through her difficult time more quickly and allowing her to recenter. And so it's just a very exciting thing to know that just in a few months, we've already started to hear feedback from the community about positive experiences. As Allison mentioned, we do also have an international therapy education program. We got a lot of questions about therapist education in the Q&A, and I will point you to that, or somebody will drop in the chat some information about that program. And there are many different US-based programs that can provide some excellent information about psychedelic therapy, theoretical fundamentals, and some of the skills that might be needed for such things in order to become a provider. The international program is particularly focused on ensuring that we are meeting our goal of increasing access to people who need it most, but might be least likely to be able to, where the systems are least able to attend to that need. And I'm very excited to say that at the last education program, we had we were able to host 10 Palestinians and 9 other Arabic-speaking therapists alongside folks from the Ukraine. We also have a publications arm. I'm sure you all are familiar with the MAPS Bulletin, one of the longest running publications covering psychedelic science, policy, and culture. Psychonauts from the counterculture, all the way to the most established scientists, have written original pieces for the MAPS Bulletin. And over the last several years, we've been honored to use the bulletin to platform voices that are less frequently heard in mainstream psychedelia. And we publish books. For more than 20 years, coming from a time when psychedelic books weren't often published in the mainstream press, MAPS has maintained a publishing arm. Last year, we printed our 22nd title, A Journal for Psychedelic Science 2023. And this year, I'll be eager to receive your proposals from authors looking for a press for their manuscripts, and we'll send a call for submissions out later this summer. We also have loads of online learning, such as the Integration Station, which we launched earlier this year, and the Virtual Trip, which is a library of access to all of the Psychedelic Science 2023 sessions that were properly recorded. There's a few technical difficulties, as there always will be. And then upcoming, of course, Psychedelic Science 2025, which Kris already mentioned. If you simply visit psychedelicscience.org, you can find both of those, information about both the virtual trip and the 2025 event. And I really hope that we'll have the chance to see you there. But for the moment, I'll turn it back over to Bridget to moderate our Q&A.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for those detailed insights into MAPS work today. Now we'll answer questions that came through with your RSVPs. There were hundreds, from the very detailed to the very broad. Because of that, we likely won't be able to address any new questions that come through today, but we are reviewing them all. Even if we can't get to your questions, it's incredibly helpful to know what they are as we're thinking about articles for the bulletin, topics for social media, sessions for Psychedelic Science 2025, and even our policy and research questions. So one of the most common questions that we had is what happens after August approval date from the FDA? Kris, take it away.
Well, the honest and unsatisfying answer here is that we don't know. Obviously, we are hoping for approval and then Lykos moving to the next step, which would be rescheduling with the DEA. But there's a range of scenarios which would play out if there's a delay. As we've talked a bunch, during this webinar, Lykos is handling the direct communications with the FDA and will make public any news as soon as they can. And listen, I understand that this period of waiting and wondering is tough. It's hard for us, especially for so many of you who have stood with us all these years, and the reality that August is just one milestone in the long, long road of ups and downs that have got us here. But MAPS as an organization is defined by our perseverance. So whatever the outcome, we're just going to press forward and do whatever we can to make this happen. We talked today on the webinar about what MAPS is going to be doing post-AUKUS here at the nonprofit, and we're still confident that we're going to get this across the finish line.
Thank you so much, Kris. So the next question is that people asked about many different psychedelics to help with many different conditions, from clinical diagnoses to systemic issues. Allison, this question is really for you. What advice would you give to someone seeking to learn more about psychedelic research?
Thanks so much. That's a great question. Despite the current excitement, on the scale of what we can really say is known or has been truly demonstrated in clinical research, the psychedelic field is practically in its infancy. So we are seeing new research initiated on an ongoing basis for many conditions. And for us to be able to determine if one substance is more effective than another for specific conditions, we expect significantly more research to come in as these different interests and findings accrue. Because there are so many endless questions to address. We hope through our Research Accelerator program that we can help advance research on our collective understanding of these potential applications and risks associated with psychedelics. I also want to note that, because this is getting so popular, we know the internet is filled with all kinds of information. Much of it is anecdotal or downright inaccurate. So we always recommend getting information from reliable and trusted sources. So if you can't find what you're looking for at maps.org, check out university centers like the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics is an excellent resource with a lot of public-facing information. And psychedelic.support also has a search aggregator for clinical trials for psychedelics that are under investigation. And these include both those in people with conditions and some in healthy volunteers, if you're looking to get involved in a trial.
Thank you so much, Allison. I know even us here at MAPS, trying to stay on top of all of the research that's happening today is tough. It's an entire job right there. This next question is for you, Izzy. Many people asked questions about what we expect medical, legal, state regulated, or other access systems to look like, and when we expect policies to change or various substances to be rescheduled.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give the usual waffly, unhelpful lawyer answer, which is it depends. But what I'll start is with saying that, as I kind of mentioned in the share earlier, there's a lot of different types of policy reform that have been proposed over the last few years. The ones that have gotten the most visibility are the citizen-led initiatives that were passed in Oregon and Colorado, Measure 109 and Proposition 122, respectively. And for good reason. Those are, in some ways, the most, the biggest steps from where things were by creating legal state-regulated programs. And as of now, we have not yet seen a program like that pass through a state legislature. So we are in an interesting environment where we know that certain types of policy reform are viable when presented to a populace or to the voters of a state, but we're still very much in the early stages of understanding what it takes to pass something through a legislature. We really learned that lesson in California over the last few years, where we've been working we've tried, I think, 3 or 4 different approaches now here in the state, all of which were limited, shot down, or stopped for a variety of reasons. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that different jurisdictions have basically like a different list of what's viable in that place. So I've heard critiques of states like Minnesota or Connecticut or Hawaii that have passed task forces. They're like, oh, a task force just delays more substantive change. And my question back to that would be, like, have you tried to do more substantive change in some of these places? I think that in some environments, like a task force or like an ongoing conversation among experts within the state is actually the thing that's most viable. And in other places, like there's other states where we can see where other options like legal or regulated access or state funding for research might actually be on the table. So again, I know that that's probably not a satisfying answer, but different facts, different environments kind of give us a different analysis. I will say that we're seeing increasing year after year interest in sensible reforms. And my favorite part is like the slight iteration as we go. In other words, everything that I've seen get introduced often takes some lesson learned from either something that's already been attempted and failed or attempted and passed. Because as I'm sure folks in Oregon and Colorado know, like we're learning lessons in those states like literally every day. So there's a certain level where the iteration that we're getting out of that information means that more and more is coming out that is also better informed. We actually just published, like I think earlier this week or last week, a legislative wrap-up about, I think we highlight 4 bills that we've been really excited about and working on, or at least adjacent to and being in conversation about. I want to say it's Utah, Massachusetts, New York, and Washington. And we have a recap about California coming out really soon, as well as some other materials that I'm really excited about that kind of go into some of this, like what exactly is the different kind of strategic approach that can be taken. We're currently talking to folks across the country in a number of states about exactly this, which is like what's possible here. So I do hope to see novel approaches to decriminalization, community use, adult use, and different kinds of regulated access to show up in other states. And the reality is we are intensely learning as we go, which I think is actually an exciting time. And I like being able to be in that honesty of saying like, hey, we're really learning as we go. Maybe the last thing I'll say just to flag this, because I think that this comes up. I don't know if specific questions came up about this, but I know that they have over the last couple of months. But while there are certain aspects of global change, both at the UN and the WHO level, as well as with specific countries, that hinges on an FDA decision, there's a lot of efforts that are going on simultaneously that do not. And I won't go into this now because I don't think we have time, but there is a lot happening at the international level broadly about drug control, drug decriminalization, medical access, research, and so on. So I do feel like we're in this very interesting place where a lot of pieces are slowly moving at the same time in different directions. And I hope that that means that in the 2025-26 seasons and legislative sessions, we see again a little bit more iteration, a little bit more courage on the part of elected representatives, and then the willingness to attempt, iterate, gather the data, and keep it moving as we kind of build from there. So again, there's a lot more to say about that, but I think that I don't want to take up the rest of the time, so I'll pause there. Thank you.
Well, I love it, Izzy. Thank you. I know I'm really interested as somebody who lives in Washington State now for what's happening there, so I appreciate it. Betty, question for you. Will MAPS continue to provide harm reduction education about psychedelics if those psychedelics are approved for therapy?
Oh, yes. Yes, 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 yes. Frankly, I wish that we had better harm reduction education about the most popular drugs in America, caffeine and alcohol. Neither of those are scheduled, right? So regardless of a drug's regulatory status, whether it's FDA approved or not for specific conditions, we all know that people are using these substances and will continue to use them, always have used them outside of those legal systems. And so the need for harm reduction education is just as great as it was, 38 years ago as it is today. And in fact, probably more so. We have been seeing increasing use rates of psychedelics amongst the population for a handful of years now. And some very smart people have posited that even after any of these substances are approved, it's entirely possible that they will be used more in non-clinical settings post-approval as compared to how often they're used within clinical settings, right? So the need is not any lessened. It is, in fact, I would say, greater now than ever before. And so the harm reduction education is more important than ever before to make sure that people are able to make the most well-informed choices possible if they do elect to use drugs or support a family member who's doing so, or a loved one who's doing so. That being said, we are no longer providing by ourselves direct service harm reduction. So we are no longer providing peer support through the Zendo project. The Zendo project is doing that on their own. And they became an independent 501c3 last year, if I remember correctly. So really what we're focusing on now is a laser focus on harm reduction education. How do we move that throughout not just our community, but communities at large? How do we make that information accessible well beyond people who might say tomorrow, oh, perhaps I'll use psychedelics someday?
Thank you so much, Betty. And so this will really kind of be our final part of the question. It was a really big question, and it's one that we very much appreciate, is people asking, how do they help? There were so many questions from our supporters, our followers, people who are following this with much care of how they can help to increase support for the treatment and progress in psychedelics. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this subject, Kris.
All right, thank you, Bridget. Well, obviously, Lycos is doing a big part of the heavy lift here, but the most important thing that we are asking people to do is to educate people within their circles of influence. If there's something that's interesting from today, please send some of the links that we share with some of your skeptical friends. If you're on social media, share the content that is supportive. If you're a therapist, a researcher, or a person who could benefit from psychedelic therapies, we ask you to submit a local op-ed to your local paper. And think about your own sphere of influence and how you can bring this information about the potential of psychedelics to the people you interact with. We can't climb this mountain on our own. But at MAPS, we are going to look beyond August and recommit ourselves to addressing the fundamental drug war stigmas and miseducation that is influencing the conversation. So if you heard something in the strategy section you're excited about, make sure you're on our email list and watch our website for more information. Before we wrap up here today, I just do want to share sort of a personal story of why I'm so committed to this work. Whenever we would go to the beach growing up, my mom would tell me this story about a woman on the beach who sees a man throwing starfish back into the ocean. And she watches him for an hour as he walks down the beach, throw starfish after starfish. Eventually, she approaches him and asks him what he's doing. And she looks to her left and right and sees thousands of other starfish remaining. And he says, you know, I'm helping save the starfish. And she says, well, why does that matter? You can't save them all. And he picks up another starfish and he throws it into the ocean. He says, because it matters to that starfish. And as you guys heard from my bio, I've like always enjoyed working and wanting to do big things and work on world-changing work. And one of the things that's just so satisfying at being at MAPS is we get to do this work with all these amazing people who you're seeing on this webinar and our staff and supporters. And we really do have a chance to like change human history and redefine, you know, how we can help people, how we can really create a movement for mass mental health. But all along this journey, we're also helping heal people and helping people find personal growth. And the amazing thing for MAPS for me is we can shoot for the stars. And if we just help the people along the way, that's pretty good too. So when you're thinking about supporting MAPS, think about how our mission, you know, has this sort of multi-level approach that we make incremental change with world-changing potential. Thank you. Appreciate you all joining today.
Thank you so much, Kris. I share your comments. This is incredibly critical right now to have the support of all in our community. MAPS is really on the front line of this movement because of our foundational work in the MDMA research under review. We've always been able to do this work thanks to a community that believes in our shared mission of healing and the mission of helping each of those individuals. Donations from our community underpin all of our work, reducing stigma, providing science-based education, and exploring every avenue that we can to bring psychedelic healing to as many humans as possible. I want to let you know that we'll share a QR code to support MAPS financially in just a moment. But as Kris said, tell your circle as well about this. If they aren't involved, get involved today. Read an article today. This is really the time to join this movement. So thank you all again for joining us today. If you're called to support this mission, you'll find the QR code on the screen. You'll also receive a follow-up email from us with key actions, including some of these links that we've mentioned to share out to your communities. Keep an eye out for news from MAPS and all the movement leading work we're doing to build a post-prohibition world through August 11th and beyond. I think to some of our other colleagues who've been helping out behind the scenes want to come up and just say hello and thank all of you for joining us this evening. We're grateful for an hour of your time getting to know us a little bit better.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And shout out to the team that have made this possible. Kevin, Hella, Henna, Alita, Grace, and everybody. Just really appreciate it. It's really, truly a whole crew that makes this possible. So thanks all so much. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Bridget, for holding this.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.